When it comes to finding retro gaming goodies, people will always say you gotta look out in the wild. So I figure if I'm gonna look for games in the wild, I'm gonna look for games in the wild. I go to the woods and I'm looking everywhere, up in trees, underneath logs, in the bushes, and the only thing I ever found was a half-eaten banana. So was it worth it? You better believe it, buddy. I did have to run away from a giant bear though. That thing was pissed. But how was I supposed to know that underneath its sleeping baby cub there wouldn't be a Sega Saturn or any other number of retro gaming goodies? I had to check. You're not supposed to run away from bears, are ya? Oh well, you know what they always say, when it comes to game hunting, it's all about the thrill of the chase. The thing about game hunting is that I think it's really easy for a lot of us to get swept up in the super awesome stories we see of people getting these incredible things for really low prices in the most unlikely of places, and we see that and we think, oh my goodness, I gotta find some of those deals for me. But just because you can find amazing things doesn't mean you will every single time. Quick little story for you. So one of the very first times I ever went to the flea market, this was back in 2011, I go because of all the wonderful things I've heard about finding cool game stuff at flea markets. So I roll up to the flea market and I've got a big wad of $1 bills, big dreams, and a big old smile on my face, and I think to myself, I think I'd like Thunder Force 3 for Sega Genesis, and then maybe Ninja Gaiden 2 for NES, or not, you know what, make that Ninja Gaiden 3 for NES, and then, maybe some Sega Saturn games, but doesn't really matter which ones. I don't want to be too picky. And guess what lucky old me found? Tons of stuff. Old dishes, boxes of miscellaneous cables, and all sorts of landscaping equipment. Now, I actually would continue to go to this flea market every single weekend for a few months in a row, and sometimes I'd find something kind of good, other times maybe I wouldn't. But what definitely happened is I adjusted my expectations before I went each day. Then as the years went by, I started finding it even harder and harder to find stuff until eventually it got to the point where I just felt like it wasn't worth my time. Things just seemed to really dry up, and from what I've heard and seen from other people, they've experienced this as well. And I would say a lot of this just has to do with awareness of retro gaming and the fact that these older games are valuable. They're things that people want, they desire, there's a demand for them. And the more people there are who are aware of the demand for retro games, the more you have people transitioning from a get rid of this crap mindset to a hey, I could make a little bit of cheddar off these games mindset. What I always find kind of funny is when sellers at some place like a flea market are selling their games for eBay prices, and that's when gamers just think, this is why I didn't buy my games on eBay, so that I could go to a flea market and pay the eBay prices anyway. If you're going to a flea market, usually you're looking to at least save a little bit of money. Of course, when it comes to finding games in the wild, flea markets are not the only option. There's also stuff like yard sales, thrift shops, your neighbor's garage when they're not home, or maybe not that one, but heck, you can even find stuff on the side of the road, somebody's curb, especially if you're keeping an eye out for those CRT TVs, baby. But what about finding games at a game store? The good old brick and mortar walk through the front door type of game store. Does that count as finding games out in the wild? Well, I've noticed that people really like to debate this, and for the people who don't think it counts, a lot of times their reasoning will be something like, well, there kind of needs to be an almost unintentionalness with finding games out in the wild, so that when you find them, it's with other random things that aren't really connected to them, and you think, oh my goodness, I was not expecting to find this specific game in this specific place. Now this is wild. Whereas at a game store, the games that are there very intentionally, and really what it might come down to is that for some people, finding games in the wild means finding them somewhere where whoever has them doesn't really know what they're worth, and therefore they're able to get them for cheaper. But regardless of how you're hunting for games, what seems to really help is if the hunt itself is fun and you're not relying on what you find to make it worth it, because a lot of times there is a lot of time that you're putting into hunting for these games. So if you feel like what you either find or don't find wasn't worth your time, but you still had fun looking, going to wherever it was you went to hunt for these games, then you're all set, because that way every time you go game hunting, you're gonna have fun regardless. And then if you happen to find something on top of that, then that's just the extra little bonus. But for a lot of people, if they're not finding stuff, they're not having fun. And in a lot of cases, they have to get up pretty early just to have a chance of finding some of these deals. And so they figure, what the heck am I doing here? On one of the few days of the week where I don't have to get up super early, I'm gonna get up super early anyway, even though I don't have to go to work, just to go to some different place that also disappoints me. One thing that definitely will help your chances though while game hunting is to be as open as possible. The less picky you are, the better your chances, because if you find something and you're like, well, this wasn't really on my radar, but it's a good deal, so sure, add it to the collection. Now, will it be something that you're glad to have down the road? I don't know, can't say. Maybe sometimes it will be, or maybe other times it won't be. I know that sometimes people will pick something up for cheap just because they figure, well, I don't know if I really even want this, but maybe one day I will, or maybe give it to a friend, or who knows what. I also want to talk about the just one more time mindset that can come along with game hunting. Quick little story for you. So Goodwill, I go there one day and I find Contra for NES for $3. Now this isn't some sort of monster deal. I mean, it's a game that cost about $25 at the time I picked it up, so I was pretty excited. That's a great deal. And so now it's in my brain, I can find stuff at this place. So every time I went to the grocery store, because Goodwill was on the way, this is about once a week I'm going, I thought, I should pop in there and see if I can find something. Well, I go for the next year, 2 years, and never found anything else ever again. But every time I went by there, I thought, this could be the time. And more importantly, I thought, if I don't go in there, what if it was the time and I missed out? So I have to go in there and check and make sure. You know, years ago when I would see or hear stories about people who found really cool stuff while game hunting, my reaction used to be more of a jealous kind of, I wish it was me who had found that. But nowadays, I don't really care. I'm just excited for those people to have found that stuff. It's really cool to know that even though I'm not really game hunting myself out in the wild anymore, to know that some people still are and they're finding stuff and they're excited about it, I think it's great. Although, one thing I would like to add, so you know how I'm always talking about game collecting culture? Well, when it comes to game hunting out in the wild, and you're open-minded about just sort of trying to find whatever it is you can find for cheap, this may lead to collecting for certain consoles that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise. Again, I'm not saying this is necessarily a good or bad thing, but it is something that contributes to the culture we have surrounding game collecting. All right, but by this point, I know what a lot of you are probably thinking. What about the kids? Well, I've heard that some of you will actually go game hunting with your children out in the wild, and that sounds like a lot of fun, kind of a great parent-child bonding activity. So yeah, I'm all about that. Heck, if a kid finds an older game out in the wild, then they might be more excited to actually play it, and that way retro gaming can live on through them. But with that said, it's time for this video's question, which is, what do you think of game hunting out in the wild? And more specifically, do you still do it? And if not, what are your reasons? And if so, what are your reasons? I would love to hear what you all have to say, as always. So with that, leave your comment down below, and I will see ya in the next video.
the retro bird, yeah. And he's talking about video games. He's the retro bird, oh yes. And he hopes that you liked what he had to say.